Picture this. You are sitting inside a chamber the size of a cathedral, suspended in the empty dark between stars, and you are listening to the sound of 46 species settling into their seats. It is not a sound you forget. The Vorlani exhale through their gill slits as they fold down. The Corathans click their mandibles softly against the curved rest plates designed exactly for their anatomy. The Oremics, who consider themselves the oldest civilization in the known galaxy, lower themselves onto cushions of woven silver thread with a small synchronized sigh that they have been performing at official functions for 9,000 years. The Tellurids hum. The Queneth fold inward. The Asari recline. 46 species, each one cradled by furniture engineered for their bones, their joints, their grief. And then there is the human row. We do not sit. I am standing at the back, third from the left, in a black protocol uniform that itches at the collar. My name is Eli Mercer, and I am 26 years old, and I have been a junior protocol officer for the Earth delegation for exactly 14 months. I am not important. I am the kind of officer who carries the documents nobody reads and refills the water pitchers nobody drinks from. But on this day, in this hall, I am about to witness something that will quietly rewrite the legal foundations of the conquered, and I do not yet know it. To my right, Captain Myra Vasquez is also standing. She is 41. Her brother died 3 years ago in a colony raid on a world the Oremic conquered refused to defend. She has not spoken his name in this chamber. She will not speak it today either. To her right, Dr. Samuel Akafer is standing. He is 68. He is the only xenoanthropologist on Earth's delegation, and he has spent the last decade studying the Sapiens Index, the rating system that is about to be used to legally strip humanity of its colonial protections. And to his right, the rest of us, 12 humans in a row, standing perfectly still, while 46 species watch and wonder if we have forgotten how to bend our knees. Across the chamber, on a rest plate of woven silver, an Oremic diplomat named Vale Tor Resin leans toward his attaché. He has 4 eyes, 2 of which are watching the human row with open amusement. He whispers a question. The attaché smiles. A small recording drone hums quietly above their station. Vale Tor does not know it yet, but he has 6 hours left of being the man he is. In 6 hours, he will be on his knees. This is the story of how a question about funerals became one of the most important moments in the early history of human contact. It is the story of a bureaucratic empire that tried to raid us, of a young engineer named Theo, Han who never came home, and of a promise so old that no other species in the galaxy had ever thought to make it. But to understand what happened in that chamber, you have to understand what the humans were standing for. And to understand that, you have to go back to the morning the news arrived. Before we go any further, if you are enjoying this story, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps these forgotten chapters of Contact Terra history reach more listeners. And please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. I love seeing this audience scattered across so many cities, so many time zones, all of us pausing in our different corners of the world to think about the same quiet thing together. If you have ever stood at a funeral and felt something you could not quite explain, this story is for you. Let's continue. The Conquered Spire is not a beautiful station. It was built 900 years ago in orbit around a dead star, in a region of space so empty that no fleet could approach it without being detected from a week away. It was meant to be neutral ground, a place where species could meet, argue, sign treaties, and bury their dead without anyone reaching for a weapon. From the outside it looks like a long gray needle, 12 kilometers from tip to tip, with a single great ring at its center where the mourning hall sits. The mourning hall is the only chamber in the galaxy where all 47 recognized species are legally allowed to gather at once. It is also the chamber where the Sapiens Index hearings are held. The Sapiens Index is, on paper, a beautiful idea. It is a rating system that measures how civilized a species is, how they treat their elderly, how they communicate with their young, how they handle conflict, how they honor their dead. Species who score high on the index receive full conquered protections, including the right to defend their colonies from annexation. Species who score low receive what the Oremics politely call developmental oversight, which is a phrase that means older species are legally permitted to take their worlds and call it mentorship. The index was designed to lift young civilizations up. It is now used to take them apart. Humanity has been a conquered member for 11 years. In that time, we have been rated 3 times. Each time our score has dropped, not because we have done anything wrong, but because the species who design the index keep adding new criteria that, by remarkable coincidence, always seem to align with traits the Oremics happen to possess and humans happen to lack. The 4th rating hearing was scheduled for the morning of what would have been Theo Hand's 28th birthday. He never made it to the hearing. He never made it to the birthday. But before we get to Theo, you need to meet the man who was about to downgrade us. Vailtor Ressin had served on the Sapiens Committee for 62 standard years. He had personally voted to downgrade 4 species in that time. 2 of them no longer existed as independent civilizations. One of them existed only as a protectorate under Oremic administration. The 4th had been absorbed so completely that its language was now taught in Oremic universities as a dead dialect. He was not a cruel man in the way you might imagine a villain. He did not laugh at suffering. He did not enjoy paperwork that ended species. He simply believed, with the bone-deep certainty of someone who has never been wrong in a way that mattered, that some civilizations were more worthy than others, and that it was his sacred duty to sort them. He believed humanity belonged in the lower category, and he had spent the last 8 months preparing the documentation to prove it. What he did not know, what he could not have known, was that one of the criteria he had recently added to the index, a criterion about how a species behaves at funerals, was about to detonate in his face. To understand why the Sapiens Index had become a weapon, you have to look backward. It was not always this way. 900 years ago, when the conquered was young and the great old species were still learning how to share a galaxy without burning it, a council of 7 civilizations sat down to write the first version of the index. They were tired. They had just emerged from a century of wars over which species got to colonize which world, and they had collectively decided that the next time a young civilization joined the conquered, there needed to be a way to assess them that was not based on military strength. The original index had 3 categories. How does this species care for its weakest members? How does this species communicate disagreement without violence? How does this species remember the ones it has lost? That was it, 3 questions. Simple, dignified, humane. For the first 300 years the index worked. Young species were rated. Mentorship programs were established. The galaxy slowly stitched itself together. Civilizations that scored poorly were offered help, not punishment. Mentors were assigned. Time was given. And then slowly, like rust on a beautiful old hull, the index began to corrode. It started with small additions. A subcommittee proposed measuring aesthetic sophistication, which sounded harmless until you realized that the species who designed the criteria happened to be the species whose art everyone was now expected to admire. Another subcommittee added linguistic complexity, which was reasonable until the species with the most complex grammar began using it as a reason to dismiss simpler languages as primitive. A third subcommittee added ritual coherence, and that one, more than any other, was where the wolves got in. By the time humanity joined the conquered, the index had 217 criteria. Most of them had been added by the Oremics. All of them, by remarkable coincidence, favored species who behaved like Oremics. The last species to receive a low rating had been the Sapphira. They were a quiet people who lived on 3 small worlds at the edge of the conquered. Their crime, according to the rating committee, had been that their funeral rites involved sitting on the ground for an entire day, which the Oremic delegation classified as a failure to display vertical reverence. Their worlds were placed under developmental oversight. Within 20 years, their language was extinct. The humans on Earth's delegation had read the Sapphire report, all 12 of them, cover to cover. They knew what was coming. What they did not know, what nobody in the chamber yet understood, was that the Criterion Veiltor had been quietly drafting for the past 2 years. The one he was going to unveil at the upcoming hearing, the one designed specifically to lock humanity into the lower tier, was a criterion about how species behave at funerals. He had named it the Rest Coherence Standard. It measured whether a species' funeral rites involved seated reflection, which Oremic philosophy considered the highest form of grief. Species who sat were rated highly. Species who did not sit were rated as ritually immature. He was very proud of it. He had no idea what humans actually did at funerals. He had not bothered to find out. By the morning of the hearing, Veiltor Ressin was already, in his own mind, victorious. If you had walked through the Oremic quarter of the conquered spire that day, you would have seen him moving with the calm confidence of a man who has prepared everything. His attachés trailed behind him carrying ceremonial document tubes. His robes were the deep silver of his caste. He stopped twice on the way to the chamber, once to speak with the Corothan ambassador, who owed him a favor, and once to greet the Tellurid observer, who was likely to vote with the Oremics on procedural matters. He had counted the votes. He had the majority. What he did not have, and what he did not realize he needed, was any real understanding of the species he was about to demote. He had read Earth's cultural file exactly once, 3 months earlier, and only the executive summary. He knew that humans were bipedal, omnivorous, and had developed faster-than-light travel relatively recently. He knew that they were emotionally expressive, which he considered a sign of immaturity. He knew that they buried their dead in the ground, which he considered quaint. He had not read the section on human funeral traditions because he assumed, with the easy confidence of someone who has never been corrected, that there could not possibly be anything in there that would surprise him. It was during this period, in the weeks leading up to the hearing, that Veiltor developed a small linguistic tic that the human delegation noticed almost immediately. He could not say the word funeral. Whenever the topic came up in committee, he said fuel-narrow, not funeral, fuel-narrow, with the stress on the first syllable as if it had something to do with combustion. The first time it happened, Captain Myra Vasquez had been sitting across the table from him. She had blinked once, very slowly. She had not corrected him. The second time it happened, Dr. Okafor had been the senior human in the room. He had also not corrected him. By the 5th or 6th time, it had become a quiet understanding among the human delegation. Nobody was going to correct Veiltor Ressin, not because it was beneath them, not because they were afraid, but because there is a particular flavor of human dignity that emerges when a powerful person mispronounces something important and you decide, collectively and without discussion, to simply let him. The Oremic attachés noticed that the humans never corrected him. They interpreted this as a sign of human deference. This was an error. It was not deference. It was a kind of patience that the Oremics did not yet have a word for. Veiltor walked into the morning hall that morning still saying fuel-narrow. He had said it 4 times in the previous week. He would say it twice more before the day ended. And each time, the humans in the chamber would hear it, exchange the smallest of glances, and say nothing. He thought he was winning. He had not yet learned that there are some games where the people who say nothing are the ones holding all the pieces. The news about Theohan arrived at 04:17 station time, 2 hours before the hearing was scheduled to begin. I was the one who took the call. I was in the small office adjacent to the human delegation's quarters, refilling a water pitcher that nobody had drunk from when the communications panel chimed. I answered it expecting another procedural update from the Concord Secretariat. Instead, I heard the voice of the dock supervisor, who was crying. Theo Han had been a 27-year-old engineer assigned to the human delegation as technical support. He fixed the translation arrays. He fixed the gravity plates. He fixed the small humming devices that kept the human quarters at the correct temperature. He was 3 weeks away from rotating home to see his mother in Manila, who had not been well. There had been an accident in the lower maintenance ring. A pressure seal had failed. By the time the emergency crew reached him, there was nothing to do. Captain Vasquez took the news standing up. She read the report twice, set the tablet down, and did not speak for a long time. When she did speak, her voice was very quiet. "We hold the funeral here," she said, "today before the hearing." Dr. Akafer looked at her. He understood immediately what she was saying. The morning hall was the only chamber on the spire large enough to hold a funeral. It was also the chamber where the Sapiens Index hearing was scheduled to take place in 2 hours. Concord law required that mourning ceremonies take precedence over all other proceedings. If the humans held Theo's funeral in that chamber, the hearing would be delayed. And every species on the Concord would be required to attend, because that was the law that had been written 900 years ago by 7 tired civilizations who had decided that grief was the one thing nobody got to schedule around. Veiltor Resin would have to sit through it. In full view of 46 other species, the Oremic Diplomat who had spent 2 years drafting a criterion designed to humiliate humans at their own funerals would be required to attend one. Captain Vasquez had not planned this. She would never have used Theo's death as a strategic move. The decision to hold the funeral in the morning hall was not tactical. It was the only place on the station where a human could be properly honored, and Theo deserved to be properly honored, and that was the end of it. But she also knew, as she stood there with the report in her hand, what was about to happen. Dr. Akafer put his hand on her shoulder. "He needs to see it, Myra," he said. "He needs to see what we do." She nodded once. The notification went out to the Concord Secretariat at 04:42. The hearing was officially delayed. A mourning ceremony had been declared by Earth's delegation. Attendance was mandatory under Concord law. 2 hours later, 46 species filed into the mourning hall. And the human row did not sit down. Part 7. The chamber was full by 06:30. I remember the sound of it, the Vorlani exhaling through their gill slits, the Corathans clicking softly, the Oremics lowering themselves with their 9,000-year sigh. 46 species, each one cradled in furniture designed for their bones, settling in for a ceremony they did not yet understand. The human row stood. Theo's body lay at the center of the chamber, wrapped in white cloth, on a platform that floated 1/2 meter above the floor. His face was uncovered. He looked very young, younger than 27, younger than I had ever noticed when he was alive, refilling coolant lines and laughing at his own jokes in the maintenance corridors. Captain Vasquez stood at the head of the row. Dr. Akafer stood beside her. The rest of us, 10 more humans in black protocol uniforms, stood behind them in a single straight line. We did not shift our weight. We did not cross our arms. We did not lean. We stood the way humans have stood at funerals for as long as humans have buried their dead, which is to say, perfectly still with our eyes open, breathing slowly. Across the chamber, Veiltor Resin lowered himself onto his silver cushion. He watched the human row. He watched it for a long time. Then he leaned toward his attaché and whispered something. The attaché nodded and tapped a small device on his wrist. A recording drone lifted silently from the Oremic station and drifted toward the human row. Veiltor stood up. He did this with deliberate slowness, the way a man stands when he wants everyone to notice. His silver robe settled around him. He walked, not quickly but not slowly either, across the chamber floor toward the human row. The other species watched. The Vorlani ambassador's gill slits flared once, in what I would later learn was the Vorlani equivalent of a raised eyebrow. Veiltor stopped 3 meters from Captain Vasquez. He spoke loudly, loud enough for the recording drone to catch every word, loud enough for the simultaneous translation arrays to carry his voice into 46 languages at once. "Captain Vasquez," he said, "forgive my curiosity. I have observed many fuel narrows in my time on the Concord. I have never seen a species refuse to sit during one. Is it that your people are unable to remain still in a seated position for the duration of grief? Or is there some other reason your delegation chooses to stand?" The chamber went very quiet. It was the kind of quiet that happens when 46 species simultaneously realize they are witnessing something that will be talked about for centuries. Captain Vasquez did not answer. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Theo's face. Her hands hung at her sides. She was, in that moment, doing exactly what she had been trained to do, which was to not engage with provocations during a funeral ceremony. But Dr. Samuel Acaffer stepped forward. He was 68 years old. He had spent his life studying the way species honor their dead. He had written 4 books on the subject. He had buried his wife 12 years earlier on a small island off the coast of Lagos, and he had stood at her grave for 6 hours in the rain, and he had not sat down. He looked at Veiltor Ressin. He looked at the recording drone. He looked at the 46 species watching. And he said very quietly, "I will explain." Part 8. Dr. Acaffer did not raise his voice. He spoke at exactly the volume of a man explaining something to a single person across a small dinner table. The translation arrays caught it. The recording drone caught it. The chamber, somehow, caught it too, every species leaning in slightly, the Corathans angling their mandibles, the Vorlani holding their breath. "When a human dies," he said, "we make a promise to them." He paused, he looked at Theo. "The promise is very old, older than our writing, older than our cities. It is one of the first promises our species ever learned to keep. We do not know exactly when we started making it, but we know we have never stopped." He turned slightly, so that he was speaking not only to Veiltor but to the chamber. "The promise has 3 parts. The first part is this: we will not leave you behind. When you can no longer walk, we will carry you. When you can no longer be carried, we will stay with you. We do not abandon our dead in the place where they fell. We bring them home." He paused again. The chamber did not move. "The second part is this: we will not lower you while we rest. When we carry you to the place where you will be buried, we do not set you down to take a break. We do not stop. We do not put you on the ground while we sit. We carry you the entire way, even if it takes all day, even if our arms burn because you cannot carry yourself anymore, and we will not ask you to wait while we are comfortable." His voice was steady. He was not performing. He was simply telling them. "And the third part," he said, "is this: we will not sit while you cannot. As long as your body is in the room with us, as long as you are present among the living for the last time, we will remain on our feet, because you cannot stand, because you cannot rise, because the difference between the living and the dead in our oldest understanding is that the living can still stand up. And so, for as long as you are with us, we honor that difference by standing." He looked at Veiltor. "That is why we do not sit at our funerals, not because we cannot, not because we are too primitive to remain in a seated position. We stand because we made a promise, a very long time ago, that we would not rest while our dead could not. And we have kept that promise for every human who has ever died. We will keep it for Theo Han today. We will keep it for the next human who dies tomorrow. We will keep it for as long as our species exists." He looked back at Theo. "It is not a ritual," he said. "It is a debt." The chamber was silent. I have tried to describe this silence many times in the years since, and I have never gotten it right. It was not the silence of people who did not know what to say. It was the silence of people who had just learned that something they thought they understood was actually something else entirely. Veiltor Resin did not move. The recording drone was still hovering. The attachés were still watching. The Oremic delegation was still arranged on its silver cushions. But something in the room had shifted, and Veiltor could feel it shifting, and he did not yet know what to do about it. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at his attachés. He looked at the recording drone. He reached up very slowly and gestured for the drone to stop recording. It powered down. The Oremic attachés lowered their wrists. And Veiltor Resin, for the first time in his 62 years on the Sapience Committee, did not know what to say. Part 9. 6 hours. That is how long Theo Hand's funeral lasted. 46 species sat in the mourning hall while 12 humans stood. The ceremony moved through its phases, the reading of names, the speaking of memory, the silence for breath. Captain Vasquez read a short letter from Theo's mother, who did not yet know her son was dead because the message had not yet reached Manila. She read it in English first, then in Tagalog. Her voice did not break. The humans did not move. We did not shift our weight. We did not adjust our stance. We did not look at each other. We stood the way our species has stood for grief since before we had words for grief. The ache in my legs began in the first hour. By the third, my lower back was a single sustained burn. By the fifth, my feet felt like I was standing on broken glass. I did not move. Theo could not move. That was the point. Around the second hour, I noticed that the Vorlani ambassador had stopped breathing through her gill slits in the rhythmic way she usually did. She was breathing in a different pattern, one I had not seen before, one that I would later learn was the Vorlani equivalent of paying respect. Around the third hour, the Corathans began to fold their mandibles inward, a gesture they normally reserved for their own ancestors. Around the fourth hour, the Tellurids began to hum at a lower frequency. Across the chamber, the Oremic delegation sat very still on their silver cushions. Veiltor Resin had not moved since Dr. Akafer finished speaking. He sat with his 4 eyes open, watching Theo's body, watching the human row, watching the chamber slowly transform around him. His attachés had put away their recording devices. The rating committee, 3 Oremics seated behind him, were whispering among themselves with an urgency that had not been present at the start of the ceremony. In the 5th hour, one of the rating committee members rose quietly from her cushion and crossed the chamber to the conquered secretariat. She handed over a tablet. The secretariat read it, nodded once, and stamped it with the official seal. The rest coherent standard was withdrawn. It was a quiet withdrawal. No announcement, no speech. Just a tablet, a stamp, and a piece of bureaucratic violence that would never now happen. The criterion Veiltor had spent 2 years drafting, the one designed to lock humanity into the lower tier of the Sapience Index, was simply removed from the agenda. No vote was taken. No discussion was held. The committee had read the room, and the room had told them everything they needed to know. In the 6th hour, as the ceremony approached its end, Veiltor Resin stood up. He did this slowly. His silver robes were creased from sitting. His 4 eyes were fixed on Theo's body. He walked, not quickly and not slowly, across the chamber floor. He stopped 3 meters from Captain Vasquez, exactly where he had stood 6 hours earlier. He did not speak. He looked at Theo. He looked at the human row. He looked at Dr. Akafer. And then, in front of 46 species and a chamber full of witnesses, and 1,000 years of Oremic tradition that forbade his caste from ever lowering themselves before another species, Veiltor Resin slowly, deliberately, and with the kind of gravity that takes a lifetime to learn, lowered himself to his knees. He did not say anything when he did it. He did not look up. He did not perform. He simply knelt. The Oremic attachés behind him made a sound I had never heard before, a small collective intake of breath, the sound of a civilization watching one of its oldest rules quietly break. The recording drone, which had been switched off, was not switched back on. No one filmed it. There is no official Concord record of Veiltor Ressin's gesture. It exists only in the memory of the species who were there. He stayed on his knees for the final 10 minutes of the ceremony. When Theo's body was finally lifted and carried out of the chamber by the human delegation, not lowered, not rested, carried, Veiltor was still kneeling. He did not rise until the last human had passed through the doorway. Part 10. The Sapience Index was not abolished. Humanity's rating was not raised. The committee did not issue an apology. The Oremic Concord did not release a statement. Veiltor Ressin did not resign. He returned to his quarters that night and was seen the next morning at breakfast, sitting in his usual place, drinking his usual silver-laced tea. To anyone who had not been in the chamber, nothing had changed. But something had changed. 3 weeks later, a quiet addition was made to Concord law. It was buried in a procedural amendment that almost no one read. The amendment stated that no criterion could be added to the Sapience Index without the unanimous consent of all 47 member species. The Oremic delegation did not object. The amendment passed without debate. The rest coherent standard was never reintroduced. 5 years later, the Sapphira worlds, which had been under Oremic developmental oversight for 2 decades, were quietly returned to independent governance. The official explanation cited procedural review. There was no public connection to the events in the morning hall, but the Sapphira delegation, when they next attended a Concord ceremony, brought a small bouquet of white flowers and placed them at the spot where Theo Hand's body had rested. They did not explain. They did not need to. Veiltor Ressin served on the Sapience Committee for another 11 years before he retired. In his final speech before stepping down, he said something that the Oremic Concord did not include in its official record, but that the human delegation transcribed in full and keeps in a glass case in the Earth Embassy on the Concord Spire. He said, "I have spent my life sorting civilizations. I have learned too late that the only civilizations worth measuring are the ones who measure themselves by what they owe the dead." He did not say the word funeral in that speech. He said funeral. He pronounced it correctly. If you walk through the morning hall of the Concord Spire today, almost 2 centuries after the events I have just described, you will see a small bronze marker set into the floor at the exact spot where Theo Hand's body once rested. The marker has no inscription. It is unmarked metal, polished smooth by the feet of the species who pass over it. The humans who serve on the Concord still hold their funerals there. They still stand. The other species who have learned what the standing means no longer ask why. The Vorlani now stand beside us during human ceremonies. The Corathans do not sit when a human body is in the room. The Tellurids hum at a lower frequency. The Queneth fold inward. Even the Oremics, when one of us dies, rise from their silver cushions and remain on their feet for the duration, which is something no Oremic was ever permitted to do before the day Veiltor Ressin knelt. It is a small thing, a change in how a few species behave at a few ceremonies. It does not show up on the Sapience Index. It is not measured by any committee. It is not recorded in any treaty. But I think, sometimes, that it is the most important thing humanity has ever done in the galaxy. Not because we won an argument. Not because we humiliated a diplomat, not because we forced anyone to do anything, but because we showed 46 other civilizations that there is a kind of dignity that cannot be rated, a kind of obligation that cannot be downgraded, a kind of strength that has nothing to do with technology or military power or aesthetic sophistication or linguistic complexity. We showed them that the deepest civilizations are the ones who keep promises to people who can no longer hear them. I am 81 years old now. I am writing this from a small apartment on Earth, in a city my grandparents grew up in, with a window that looks out at a sky I have not seen often enough in my life. I have stood at many funerals since Theo's. I will stand at more before I am finished. And when my time comes, the humans I love will stand for me, and they will not sit while I cannot rise, because that is the promise we make, and we have not yet failed to keep it. I have spent a long time thinking about Veiltor Resin and the day he knelt. I have wondered what it costs a civilization to admit that another civilization has something it does not. I have wondered what it would have cost the Oremics if they had never knelt. I think about all the promises we make in this life, to the living and to the dead, and how easily we let them slip. I think about how the galaxy measured us and got it wrong, and how the galaxy measures itself and gets it wrong too. And I think, at the end of all of it, about the question that nobody in that chamber thought to ask. Not why do humans stand at funerals, but what do we owe the people who can no longer hear us? I do not know the answer. I only know that I have spent my life trying to keep one small promise. And I hope, when the time comes, that someone will keep it for me.